All right, welcome everyone to March. Can't believe it's March already, and the third month of the year is almost over. And today, of course, we are going to be discussing Think Again, which is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant book. It was, of course, a bestseller. And it was a bestseller for all the right reasons, because it is a game changer in the sense that, especially in a world, the kind of world we're living in now, where there's so much of polarization and there's so much divide among people based on their ideas, differing ideas and opinions. How do we, in a world like this, actually learn to question our own ideas and assumptions and opinions and be open to changing them, and at the same time be a lot more understanding of another person who thinks differently from us? And how do we make a stronger bridge to them and connect to them so that we can have more and more conversations and not confrontations? So let's talk about, well, I'll share with you, there's so much from this book to share, but let's begin with at least a few key ideas. And in your breakouts, feel free to add to those ideas. So we'll do a breakout. And of course, in the end, as always, we'll have a few announcements. All right, so here's the first idea, which I think Adam Grant really sets up nicely in the book, which is, let's bring awareness to how are you in any conversation where your ideas are challenged. Do you take the role of a preacher? So preacher typically, especially in this sense, is meant, someone who takes, let's say, almost like a holier than thou attitude, saying, I am right, and I put myself on a pedestal saying I am right, and my view is the absolute truth, and that's it. And I feel very good about the fact that my view is the right view. A prosecutor goes a step beyond. If you are wearing the hat of a prosecutor, not only are you convinced that you are right and you have the high ground, but you go a step beyond and also try and prove that how the other person is wrong. So here is why you are wrong if you're in a conversation. I'll be the first to admit I do get into some kind of conversations like this, particularly with my husband. We have a lot of animated discussions where, of course, it goes into this process of, you start where you don't want to be a prosecutor, but the conversation sometimes ends up veering in that direction, where it's not just I am right, but also let me prove to you why you are wrong. And then the third one is a politician, where it's not just now about right or wrong, but also you want to win the other people over. So I am right, and here is why all of you should think like me. So come join me in thinking like me. So just like a politician would be trying to win approval and trying to rally people over to their side, that would be an example of that way of arguing or thinking. Now, the first idea in the book is that, instead of preacher, prosecutor, or politician, if we really want to have the kind of conversations that lead to greater understanding, let's actually think and argue like a scientist. What a scientist says is, here is how I could be wrong. My ideas are absolutely fallible. They can be wrong. And I'm completely open to looking at a different data point, a different data set that might give me a different perspective, that might even mean that I completely disprove or replace how I'm currently thinking with a new way of thinking or a new idea. And even if that means it doesn't make me look good, so be it. I'm a scientist. I'm committed to the truth. And so I'm going to always hold my ideas up to scrutiny. And I'm not going to be married to any opinion or idea of mine. So as Adam Grant says, thinking like a scientist involves more than just reacting with an open mind. It means being actively open-minded. It requires searching for reasons why we might be wrong. not for reasons why we might be right, and revising our views based on what we learn. So that is a fantastic way of looking at our own ideas. So the first question we would love for you to take on in your breakouts is, when you get into a heated debate, and we all do, and let's say these heated debates are with loved ones, where we feel comfortable wearing the hat of any one of these four: preacher, prosecutor, politician, or scientist, what do you find? What is your observation of yourself? Which hat do you wear? And how can you think more and more like a scientist? So that's idea number one. Let's talk about idea number two. Okay. So here is, let me kind of open this up to all of you now. And this was a really interesting example in the book, actually. So those of you who read the book would recollect this. So there was a debate that was held between two individuals, Harish and Deborah. Now, let me give you a small snippet of this debate. And for those of you who are, when you're listening to me and the ideas that both of the parties share in this debate, I want you to just make a mental note of which do you, which debater do you find more convincing? All right, so here we go. Deborah: giving opportunities to the less fortunate should be a moral obligation of any human being, and it is a key role for the state. So the debate is whether or not the government should subsidize preschool. Harish: I want to start by noting what we agree on. We agree that poverty is terrible. It is terrible when individuals don't have running water. Those are all things we need to address, and none of those are addressed just because you're going to subsidize preschool. Deborah: universal preschool creates economic savings in healthcare, as well as decreased crime, welfare dependence, and child abuse. Harish: high quality preschools will reduce crime, maybe, but so would other measures. Okay, so just based on that tiny blink, tiny sliver of the debate that was held between these two individuals, tell me, who are you going with? Who do you think, rather actually, not who you're going with, but who do you think is a more effective debater, Deborah or Harish? Tell us in the chat, Deborah or Harish? Who do you think is the more effective? Okay, Vijay says Harish, Geeta says Deborah. Okay, so one vote for each. What about the rest of you? Okay, Harish, Deborah. I want to go with Deborah, but Harish has good points. All right, Deborah. All right, it looks like we are, there's an almost, it seems it's like an even split. Okay, now, let me tell you who won the debate and why. Okay, now both have their strengths. Okay, Deborah clearly has her strengths. What Deborah is really good at, in this case, by the way, those of you who read the book, and you know, spoiler alert, I'm of course going to share with you who actually won the debate. Deborah is actually an AI bot. And being an AI, what Deborah was obviously skilled at doing is going through its database, her database of several articles, and pulling out the most compelling points that she could use to argue her point. And typically we assume that in any kind of argument, the greater the number of points you can give in favor of your idea, that's how you win an argument. You give the other person 10 reasons why they should do X, and if you can give 10 compelling reasons, the person should be convinced. That is how most of us normally tend to think. But as Adam Grant enlightens us, that is not normally how, that is not an effective way to win an argument. Instead, what we all want to do is do what Harish does, and Harish, in fact, was the one who won this debate. What Harish does is, he's not throwing point after point at his opponent. He is listening very, very carefully to Deborah. And notice, with every time he speaks, he first begins with, here's where I agree with you. Here's where I feel you are making a good point. So every step, it's not just about making point after point, but what Harish is doing, and what we can all learn from him, especially in difficult conversations, is create common ground. And this is, I think, a brilliant idea, is even when you disagree with someone, to listen carefully to them and first ask yourself, okay, is any person saying anything of value that I can actually agree with? Even if it's something as simple as, hey, I can see why you're so passionate about this. Or I can see why you might think that way. Yes, I have a different point of view, but I can respect that this is something you really deeply care about. So in a nutshell, what he's saying is, can we agree before we disagree? Because when we do, we're validating the person. And when you validate the person in front of you, they feel less defensive and they're more likely to then soften up to your argument and your ideas. So here's what Adam Grant is saying. Convincing other people to think again is not just about making a good argument. It's about establishing that we have the right motives in doing so. When we concede that someone else has made a good point, we let them know, right? We signal to them that we're not preachers, prosecutors, or politicians trying to advance an agenda. We are scientists trying to get to the truth. Arguments are often far more combative and adversarial than they need to be, is what Harish told Adam. You should be willing to listen to what someone else is saying and give them credit. Give them credit when they make a good point. It makes you sound like a reasonable person who is taking everything into account. So second point would love for you to discuss in your groups is what's an idea you have completely changed, you've done a 180 degree on. Is there an idea that you're rethinking or have rethought? And if so, what allowed you to do that? And finally, the third idea, which I really, really love, I even did a video on this, is finding joy in being wrong. If we're all going to put ourselves on a journey where we become a lot more open to questioning ourselves, instead of feeling scared to be wrong, or instead of feeling being wrong is something terrible, can we find joy in being wrong? And Adam Grant says, yes. How do we find joy in being wrong? Two things. One, let's detach our identity from our ideas. Every single one of us, we are much, much bigger than our ideas. And ideas are going to come and go. As we are learning, as we're growing, ideas are going to come and go. So let's not say I am my ideas. I am every single idea that goes through my head. No, we're all much, much bigger than that. And what he says is attach yourself to something bigger. Attached to your values. So if we're thinking like a scientist, what we're committing to is not the idea itself, but we're committing to the search for truth. We're committing to the courage to own up when we're wrong. We're committing to being kind like Harish and appreciating the person sitting in front of us, even though they have a different point of view. When you commit to those values, then you're coming from a much stronger place. And you're coming from a place where you're affirming something that is more lasting about you, which is your values, rather than ideas which come and go. So if knowledge is power, knowing what we don't know is wisdom. So can we come from that place of wisdom and always think about what we don't know and find joy in admitting what we don't know? So the third question we'd love for you to discuss in your groups is, how can you find joy in being wrong? How can you continue to put your ideas through scrutiny and not hold them so close to your heart where you're not open to changing them? So those are the three questions. As always, thank you to the Book Fairies. We love that you show up and volunteer to moderate these discussions for us. And as you might have seen on social media, we do want to recognize you for your contribution to being a book fairy. And we've already started acknowledging some of you, and we're going to continue to do that. So please do continue to volunteer. And here are the questions. We'll share these questions into the breakout rooms. There'll be 3 or 4 of you in the breakout room. So here, once again, are the questions. How do you normally think, and how can you think more like a scientist? What is an idea that you have been rethinking? And how can you find joy in being wrong? So we will, as always, give you 35 minutes, and then we'll come back and meet as a larger group and wrap up.